The air was thick with dust and mystery as the tomb was uncovered. It had been hidden for centuries, untouched by time, buried deep within the ancient desert. Inside, an unimaginable wealth of gold, jewels, and priceless artifacts glimmered in the faint light of the torches. But amid the treasure lay something more chilling. Among the riches, a woman's body. Nefertari, her name, lost to time, but etched in the tomb's curse was, buried alive with the pharaoh's wealth. Why? What had led to her tragic fate? The discovery of the tomb sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. No one had anticipated such an eerie find. A woman, not a priestess or servant, but someone clearly of importance, laid beside the pharaoh's treasure, her eyes closed forever, her hands clutching a golden amulet that seemed to pulse with a strange energy. The silence in the tomb was suffocating, as if the treasure itself held its breath. Why had she been chosen for such a fate? What had she done to deserve being entombed with the pharaoh's riches, buried alive to join the dead, never to speak again? For generations, legends had spoken of the pharaoh's treasure of a curse that would fall upon anyone who sought to claim his wealth. The tomb's discovery was no exception. Whispers of death followed those who dared to uncover the secrets of the past. Some said the wealth of the pharaoh, Seti III, had been stolen and lost to time. Others claimed that it was guarded by dark forces, cursed by the gods. Nefertari's body, placed so carefully within the tomb, seemed to prove that the curse was real. Those who sought the treasures were doomed to suffer a tragic fate. The question that haunts, the mystery, lingered like a shadow over the tomb. Who was Nefertari? Was she a servant, a lover, or a trusted confidant of Pharaoh Seti III? What had she known about the treasures that would lead to such a horrifying death? The questions filled the air, as heavy and unsettling as the oppressive silence in the tomb. Her body, her treasure-filled grave, and the rumors of a curse haunted the minds of all who dared to investigate. The world would never truly know the answers. But the question lingered. Why was she buried alive with the pharaoh's treasure? In the heart of ancient Egypt, where the Nile weaved its life-giving waters through the desert, stood the mighty kingdom of Seti III. His palace was a testament to his power, a sprawling structure adorned with towering obelisks, intricate carvings, and treasures beyond imagination. Gold, silver, and precious stones flowed in endless rivers, filling the royal halls, with every corner dripping in wealth. His reign was absolute, and none dared challenge his authority. Seti III's eyes gleamed with ambition, his heart consumed by the desire for control not only over Egypt, but over the very forces of life and death. The pharaoh's obsession with immortality drove him to amass treasures that no king before him had dared to claim. He believed that by gathering enough wealth, he could cheat the gods, securing his place in the afterlife forever. But this insatiable thirst for power did not end with riches. Seti sought something deeper, something far more sinister, a secret hidden in the depths of time, locked away in the tombs of the ancients. At the center of this extravagant kingdom stood Nefertari, a woman of grace and mystery, whose name was whispered in awe throughout the palace. She was beautiful beyond compare, her dark eyes piercing through the hearts of those who dared look upon her. Despite her youth, she held a powerful position in the pharaoh's court, revered by nobles, priests, and soldiers alike. No one knew where she came from. Some whispered that she was the daughter of a noble family, while others believed she had risen from the humble streets of Thebes. But one thing was certain: she had earned the pharaoh's favor. Her charm and wit were as legendary as her beauty. Nefertari had become the pharaoh's confidant, trusted with his deepest thoughts and secrets. She was by his side in matters of state, of war, and even in the rituals of the gods. To the people of Egypt, she was the pharaoh's most loyal servant, and some even whispered she was his lover. But the truth of their bond was far more complicated and fraught with hidden dangers. Seti III's affection for Nefertari was unmistakable. In a world where loyalty was often tested by ambition and betrayal, she stood by him as both advisor and companion. Together, they explored the darkest corners of Egyptian magic and religion, searching for ways to unlock the mysteries of the afterlife. Nefertari, though cautious, was drawn to Seti's vision of eternal life, and her loyalty grew as she became more involved in his quest. He trusted her with his most private thoughts, and in return, she shared her deepest fears. However, as the pharaoh's obsession with immortality deepened, Nefertari began to sense something ominous stirring within the palace. There were whispers of strange rituals and dark pacts, but no one dared challenge Seti's desires. She had seen the pharaoh's ruthless side, the lengths he would go to keep control, to preserve his reign, and to ensure that nothing stood in the way of his ambitions. It was this obsession, this hunger for power, that would soon draw Nefertari into a web of deception and peril, from which there would be no escape. As Seti III's reign grew stronger, his desires became more twisted. His obsession with immortality led him to seek out an ancient artifact rumored to grant eternal life. The treasure, hidden away for centuries, was said to have the power to transcend death itself. Seti believed that by acquiring this artifact, he would control not just his own fate, but that of the gods. He grew ever more consumed with the idea of holding dominion over the afterlife, and soon, Nefertari became the only person in his court who knew of this secret. At night, Seti would speak of the artifact in hushed tones, his eyes alight with fervor. He no longer spoke of peace or prosperity for Egypt. He spoke only of the treasure and the dark power it would bring. Nefertari could feel the weight of his obsession pressing down on her, and though she tried to keep her distance, the pharaoh's words haunted her. There were those in the palace who were beginning to sense the growing tension, the unease that simmered beneath the surface. But Seti's power was unchallenged, and no one dared oppose him. Nefertari had been by Seti's side for years, her loyalty unquestioned. But as his dark ambition grew, so did her fear. She could see the toll it was taking on him, his once noble heart, now corrupted by greed and thirst for power. The woman who had once been his trusted confidant began to fear for her own life. She knew that the pharaoh's obsession would cost them both dearly, and she began to question her role in his quest for immortality. Nefertari, torn between her love for Seti and her fear of the curse that surrounded his treasure, found herself standing at a crossroads. She could no longer pretend that everything was well. The darkness that enveloped Seti III was drawing her deeper into a deadly game, and she knew that sooner or later she would be forced to make a choice that would alter the course of history. As the years passed, Seti III's obsession with immortality grew. The pharaoh's search for eternal life became the singular focus of his reign, overshadowing everything else. The kingdom flourished under his rule, but his mind was no longer occupied with the affairs of Egypt. The pursuit of the afterlife consumed him entirely. He sought knowledge in forbidden texts, consulted with high priests, and even invited foreign mystics to his palace. They all spoke of an artifact, an ancient treasure with the power to defy death and grant immortality. This treasure had been hidden for centuries, buried in the depths of the desert, its whereabouts known only to a few. It was said that whoever possessed the artifact could live forever, even when their body withered away. Seti's ambition was boundless. No longer content with ruling over Egypt, he dreamed of controlling the very forces of life and death. He believed that if he could find this artifact, he could live beyond the grave, his name echoing throughout history. Nefertari, who had once been by his side as a loyal confidant, now found herself drawn into the pharaoh's madness. Seti trusted her more than anyone else, and he shared his deepest thoughts with her, even his most disturbing ones. She could see the change in him, a growing desperation that clouded his once clear judgment. His obsession turned into a compulsion that controlled him, and as time passed, Nefertari began to fear what he might become. Despite the dark turn in Seti's character, Nefertari's position in the palace continued to grow. She had earned the pharaoh's trust, and as his obsession with the treasure deepened, she became an indispensable part of his plans. He relied on her more and more, her voice becoming the only one he would listen to. Nefertari's beauty and wisdom had always been assets, but now they were a tool for her survival. She became the pharaoh's advisor, his closest companion. But the weight of this power began to wear on her. The more she learned of the artifact and the curse that surrounded it, the more she realized the peril she was in. Seti's plans had become more dangerous, more violent. He would stop at nothing to obtain the artifact, even if it meant shedding blood to do so. She could feel the darkness closing in around her, and no matter how much she tried to distance herself from his madness, she was inexorably tied to it. The more she saw of Seti's growing obsession, the more her own fear began to mount. His ambition, once pure, had twisted into something unrecognizable. The pharaoh was no longer the man she had served with such devotion. The man she loved was gone, replaced by a shadow of himself, consumed by his desire for power. Strange occurrences began to happen around the palace. At night, Nefertari would hear whispers in the halls, distant voices that carried on the wind. Priests who had once revered Seti began to withdraw from his court, refusing to perform certain sacred rites. They spoke of an ancient curse, a curse tied to the pharaoh's treasure. The royal scribes whispered that the gods were angry, that Seti's obsession had angered them, and that they would punish him for his arrogance. These murmurs grew louder, and soon even the soldiers who guarded the palace spoke in hushed tones about the growing unease that had begun to settle over the kingdom. But Seti would not listen to the warnings. He ignored the omens, brushing them aside as superstition. He was convinced that the artifact was his birthright, that it would grant him eternal rule. His fixation became all-consuming. Nefertari, on the other hand, could not ignore the signs. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. Every day, Seti's obsession grew stronger, and every night, she lay awake, haunted by the sense that something terrible was about to happen. One evening, Nefertari wandered the palace gardens, seeking peace from the ever-encroaching darkness. It was there that she overheard a conversation between two of Seti's advisors. They spoke of a plan that involved using Nefertari as a means to an end. They planned to use her as a sacrifice, believing that her life could unlock the final key to the pharaoh's immortality. The mere thought of it sent a chill down Nefertari's spine. She had always known that her fate was tied to Seti's, but never had she imagined it would lead to such a horrific end. It became clear to her that she was not just the pharaoh's confidant, she was also a pawn in a game much larger than she could control. Determined to uncover the truth, Nefertari began to search for answers. She visited the royal library, combing through ancient texts that had been hidden away for centuries. It was there that she discovered the full story of the artifact. The treasure was not just a key to immortality. It was a curse, a dangerous force that had destroyed every ruler who had sought it. The artifact had been hidden away for a reason. Those who sought it were doomed to die either by their own hand or through the wrath of the gods. It was said that only a pure soul could safely claim it, but such a soul was rare, if not non-existent. Nefertari's heart sank as she read the texts. The artifact was not a gift, it was a trap. Seti had been blind to the warnings, and now, so had she. The more she learned, the more she realized that the pharaoh's pursuit of the treasure had led him down a path of no return. The curse was real, and it was now coming for them both. But Nefertari knew that she had to act fast. If she didn't find a way to stop Seti, they would both be doomed. Torn between loyalty and survival. The discovery of the curse left Nefertari in a state of turmoil. She had always been loyal to Seti, serving him with all her heart, but now she could see the true cost of that loyalty. If she stayed by his side, she would likely die with Haim either as a victim of his madness or as a sacrifice to the gods. Yet, if she turned against him, she would betray the only man who had ever truly trusted her. The love she once felt for him had turned into something darker, something tinged with fear. But what could she do? Seti's obsession had grown so strong that there was no turning back. As days passed, Nefertari grew more desperate. The pharaoh had become a shell of the man he had once been. His thirst for the treasure had consumed him completely. She knew that she had to make a choice before it was too late, but the choices before her seemed impossible. The pharaoh's madness had already sealed their fates. There was no way to stop the course of events now. Her loyalty, once a source of strength, had become a trap. And as she lay awake at night, listening to the whispers of the tombs, she realized that the only way out was to leave the palace entirely. But even then, the curse would follow her. As Seti III's obsession with the artifact deepened, his mind became more fragile. The pharaoh trusted no one but Nefertari, but even she could feel the tremors of betrayal coursing through the palace. Horemheb, one of Seti's most trusted generals, had always been loyal, but the whispers of power and wealth that accompany the ancient artifact had seeped into his mind. Driven by his own lust for control, Horemheb began to plot against Seti, believing that if he could control the treasure, he could wield the true power of Egypt. The whispers reached Nefertari's ears as she walked the palace halls late one night. Horemheb and his allies were conspiring in secret, discussing how they could steal the artifact for themselves. The thought of Seti, already so far gone into madness, being overthrown by one of his closest allies filled Nefertari with dread. Her heart raced as she realized that Horemheb's betrayal would only hasten the ruin that Seti had brought upon them all. She had always known that there were those who sought the pharaoh's wealth, but she never imagined that one of his most trusted men would turn against him in such a ruthless way. Nefertari's loyalty was still rooted in the pharaoh, but as the schemes of Horemheb began to unfold, she knew that she had to act. She could not allow Seti's final moments to be marred by the betrayal of a man he considered his friend. The world around her had become a web of lies, deception, and greed. She could no longer sit idly by as the life of the pharaoh was threatened by those closest to him. The pharaoh's descent into madness. Seti III was blind to the treachery that surrounded him. His fixation on the treasure had pushed him beyond reason. He believed that the artifact would grant him eternal life, a gift that could only be claimed by offering up something precious, someone precious. In his delusion, he thought that by sacrificing Nefertari, his most trusted confidante, he would unlock the final piece of the puzzle. She was both his greatest love and his greatest pawn, and now she was to be the one to bring him immortality. One evening, as the sun set behind the Grand Pyramids, Seti summoned Nefertari to the royal chamber, His eyes were wild, fevered with a madness that she had not seen before. He spoke in riddles, his words tumbling out as if the gods themselves were speaking through him. He told her that she was the key to his immortality, and only by offering her life as a sacrifice could he transcend death itself. Nefertari's blood ran cold. She had heard rumors of the pharaoh's plans, but she had never imagined that he would turn on her so completely. The love that she had once felt for Seti had now turned to fear, and in that moment, she realized that she could no longer stay by his side. If she did, she would die at his hands, just as those before her had perished. She was not just the pharaoh's lover, she was a tool, a pawn in his twisted quest for power. Nefertari's mind raced. She had to escape, but she was surrounded by enemies on all sides. Horemheb's betrayal was imminent, and Seti was already planning her death. There was no way out, no way to save herself or the pharaoh. The palace, once a place of beauty and power, had turned into a prison. The walls closed in around her, and she knew her fate had been sealed. Horemheb's forces moved swiftly. That night, as Seti prepared his final ritual in the temple, Nefertari was seized by the guards loyal to Horemheb. She fought back with all her strength, but there was no escaping them. The palace that had once been her sanctuary was now her tomb. Seti, too lost in his delirium, did not even attempt to stop the betrayal. His mind was consumed with the artifact and the idea of immortality. He had already let go of the only thing that could have saved them both, his love for her. The ritual was set in motion. Horemheb's forces led Nefertari to the tomb where Seti had been preparing the final resting place for his treasures. It was there that she would be buried alive, her body placed beside the pharaoh's treasure, her life snuffed out as a sacrifice to the gods. Nefertari's heart broke as she realized that the man she had loved and trusted had condemned her to this fate. But in her final moments, she was resolute. She would die, but she would not let Seti's madness consume her. She would not let the pharaoh's greed destroy her soul. As Nefertari was sealed into the tomb, she could feel the weight of the stone pressing down on her chest, the darkness enveloping her. She closed her eyes, but her mind raced with thoughts of the Pharaoh, the man she had once loved, and who had now led her to this tragic end. She thought of the choices she had made, of the loyalty she had sworn to him, and of the horrors she had witnessed in the palace. She had been so blinded by love, so convinced that her loyalty would be rewarded. But now, as the cold darkness of the tomb surrounded her, she realized that her fate had never been in her hands. In her last breath, Nefertari whispered a prayer to the gods, hoping that she might find peace in the afterlife. She thought of the treasure of the artifact that had led Seti to this place of madness. It was not power, not immortality that had been his true goal. It was control. Control over life, control over death. And in the end, it was his desire for control that had destroyed them both. The tomb was sealed. Seti's treasure remained, but with it, the haunting presence of Nefertari's sacrifice. Time passed, and the world outside the tomb continued as it always had. The kingdom of Egypt, under Seti III's rule, still flourished in many ways. But the shadow of his obsession with immortality had cast a long, dark mark on the land. The tomb, hidden deep within the desert, remained undisturbed for many years. Yet, the stories of Seti's cursed treasure spread like wildfire through the kingdom. The whispers spoke of the betrayal, the dark ritual, and the tragic fate of Nefertari, the woman who had been buried alive alongside the pharaoh's wealth. Those who sought the tomb, eager for its treasures, found only death and misfortune. The curse of Seti's treasure proved to be more than a myth. The treasure, once believed to bring fortune, now seemed to repel anyone who dared claim it. The tomb was discovered by thieves who, in their greed, tried to plunder the riches. They were found dead soon after, their bodies twisted in agony, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. No one dared approach the tomb again. The treasure, once a symbol of ultimate power, had become a symbol of doom. The kingdom, too, felt the weight of Seti's obsession. Though he remained on the throne, his mind was no longer sharp. The ruler who had once commanded the world now ruled only over a kingdom that was slowly decaying. The priests, who had once served him faithfully, abandoned the temple rituals, refusing to offer prayers for a pharaoh who had defied the gods. The land, in its silent protest, grew barren. Crops failed, rivers dried, and the people's faith in the pharaoh began to wither as well. Nefertari's name was eventually forgotten by many, her story buried in the sands of time. However, the haunting legacy of her sacrifice lived on. In the shadows of the palace and in the whispers of the people, her name was still spoken, though not with reverence. She had been both a victim and a symbol of her tragic end, serving as a warning to those who dared seek the pharaoh's treasure, to those who believed in immortality and control over death. Her tomb, a silent witness to her painful end, became a place of mystery. The rumors persisted of a woman who had been buried alive with the pharaoh's wealth, of a curse that had claimed the lives of those who sought to steal the treasures she had been forced to guard. Generations passed, and the world moved on, but the legend of Nefertari's fate lingered like a shadow, haunting the kingdom. As the years turned into decades, and the tomb of Seti III was eventually lost to the sands of time, the true cost of Seti's greed and betrayal became apparent. His ambition had consumed him, leading him to sacrifice the one person who had loved him most. Nefertari, in her final moments, had been a pawn in a twisted game of power and control. Seti's desire for immortality had destroyed everything he had held dear. He had traded his love for a fleeting promise of eternal life, and in doing so, had sealed his own doom. Nefertari's story remained a dark cautionary tale. She had been the victim of a ruler who believed he could conquer both life and death. And in the end, her sacrifice became the catalyst for the pharaoh's downfall. The treasure that had promised immortality had become a symbol of the emptiness of such desires. The more Seti sought to control the gods, the more he lost control over his own life. Centuries passed, and Egypt itself changed. Dynasties rose and fell, but the tale of Seti III's treasure and Nefertari's tragic end remained a haunting part of the past. The tomb of the pharaoh was eventually rediscovered by explorers, but the treasure had long since vanished. All that remained was the empty tomb and the echoes of a curse that had followed those who dared to seek the wealth that had once belonged to the pharaoh. The tomb stood as a monument to the dangers of greed, obsession, and the thirst for power. Nefertari's name was lost to history, but her story lived on in the hearts of those who had heard the legend. The legend of the woman who had been buried alive with the pharaoh's treasure continued to haunt the tombs and the minds of all who dared approach it. It was a warning, a reminder of the consequences that came with seeking control over life, death, and the gods themselves. And so, the mystery of Nefertari's fate endured, lingering in the sands of Egypt, a forgotten queen and a lost treasure, her story sealed in the darkness of an ancient tomb, awaiting discovery by those who would never know the true cost of the power they sought.